Have you ever felt like you made a decision, but afterwards you couldn't quite put your finger on why you chose that particular option?
Something just kind of pushed you one way.
Exactly. Like the way the choices were presented just subtly ledged you.
It's a really common feeling, and it gets at something pretty fundamental, I think. Our decisions don't happen in a vacuum. The environment, the context, how things are framed,
hmm
it all plays a massive role.
And that is precisely what we are diving into today. Our source material is, well, it's a classic. Nudge, improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness.
Right. And our mission really is to unpack the core ideas from this source. Concepts like choice architecture, these nudges, and that slightly provocative term, libertarian paternalism.
Yeah, what do those actually mean? And maybe more importantly, why should you, listening now, care about how they affect everything from, say, government policy down to your weekly grocery shop?
It really explores this fascinating tension, doesn't it? The authors were wrestling with this idea. How can we design systems that make it easier for people to make choices that are, better for them?
Better in their own judgment, presumably.
Yes, better as they might see it with full information or reflection. But critically, doing that while still completely preserving their freedom to choose whatever they want, even if it's something, well, maybe not ideal from an outside perspective.
It does sound like a contradiction. Libertarian paternalism.
It really does. Libertarian, you think freedom; paternalism, you think guidance, maybe even control.
But the core argument in the source is that not only can these coexist, but maybe they have to if we want to help real people navigate, well, a pretty complex world.
Okay, so let's start by understanding the view of human decision-making that this whole idea is built on. If you followed any behavioral economics, you'll know there's this key distinction they make.
Right. Between two kinds of agents, I guess.
Exactly. You've got the theoretical, perfectly rational Homo economicus.
Yeah.
The source calls them econs, sort of affectionately.
These are the idealized folks who always make the perfect choice, infinite willpower, all the information.
The mythical creatures of standard economics, yeah. And then there are humans.
That's us.
That's us. And the really fundamental insight here, it seems obvious, maybe, but the implications are huge, is that humans are fallible.
We forget things. Birthdays, appointments.
We procrastinate, we get overwhelmed by too many choices, and we're definitely not perfect calculators. Complex math, often not our strong suit, especially on the fly.
And this ties directly into the idea of two systems of thinking, which they borrow from psychology, right?
Yes, exactly. The automatic system and the reflective system. The automatic is fast, intuitive, emotional. It's your gut reaction.
Like that bat and ball puzzle they mentioned. A bat and ball cost $1.10 total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball?
Your automatic system just jumps out with 10 cents. It feels right immediately.
But it's wrong.
It's wrong. If you stop, engage your reflective system, the slow, deliberate, calculating part, you work it out. If the ball was 10 cents, the bat would be $1.10, making the total end all in 20 cents.
So the ball has to be 5 cents. Bat is $1.05. Total $1.10. Needs that extra step.
Precisely. That's the reflective system kicking in.
The Stroop test is another great example they use, where you see the word RED written in blue ink, and you have to say the color of the ink.
Your automatic system wants to read the word RED. It interferes, makes it harder for your reflective system to correctly identify and say blue.
It shows the conflict between the two systems.
And the really important point the source makes is that this isn't just about a few quirky people. These systems and the potential for these predictable mistakes or blunders, they apply to everyone.
They say there's a Homer Simpson lurking somewhere in each of us.
Yes. Even the experts fall prey to these things outside their area of expertise.
And because that automatic system is so fast, it has to rely on shortcuts, right? Mental shortcuts.
Exactly. Heuristics. They're usually helpful, quick ways to judge things. But sometimes they lead us down predictable paths into biases.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those biases. The first one they dive into is anchoring.
Right. Anchoring is where your mind latches on to the first piece of information. It gets the anchor and relies on it too heavily when making a decision, even if that anchor isn't, super relevant.
The Social Security calculator example they give is pretty stark. It shows you this big single lump sum figure for your future benefits.
Yeah, sounds great, right? A big number.
But without context, interest rates, inflation, taxes, spousal benefits, that single number acts as an anchor, can really skew your perception of how much you actually need for retirement. Maybe make you think you're better prepared than you are.
Or think about credit card bills. That minimum payment amount,
Oh yeah, classic anchor.
it's tiny, but it's right there, prominent. Doesn't stop you paying more, obviously, but it subtly suggests, hey, this low amount is kind of okay, even though paying only the minimum is, well, incredibly costly in the long run with interest.
It anchors your idea of a reasonable payment way too low.
Precisely. And they even mention things like the rent jar idea, this mental accounting where people label money for specific purposes, even if it's all in the same bank account. That label anchors how you think about spending that specific pot of money.
Okay, so anchoring is one. What's another major bias?
Another big one is availability, the availability heuristic.
This is about how easily things come to mind, right?
Exactly. We judge how likely or risky something is based on how easily we can recall examples. If examples are vivid and recent, they feel more probable.
Like after 9/11, the fear of terrorism, which was suddenly very available in everyone's mind, might overshadow statistically larger but less vivid risks.
Right, or the fear of a shark attack versus, say, the risk from driving your car or even sunbathing. The rare dramatic event sticks in the mind more easily than the common mundane danger.
The source uses the example of cancer clusters too, which is fascinating. People see cases seeming to group together on a map and immediately think something must be causing it.
Yeah, the availability of those few cases makes the cluster seem significant, alarming. People search for causes: a local factory, maybe contaminated water.
But often, statistically, these clusters are just random chance.
In a large population, randomness doesn't always look perfectly spread out. It clumps. Think about the V-bomb example from London during World War II. People saw patterns in where the bombs hit near the Thames, maybe avoiding certain areas.
So they speculated about spies or targeting strategies.
But later analysis showed the hits were basically random. Our brains are pattern-finding machines. The automatic system sees a pattern because randomness is easily available as not looking random.
Which leads nicely into the next bias they discuss, representativeness.
Yeah, this is where we judge likelihood based on how much something resembles a stereotype, or our idea of what, say, a random sequence should look like.
Like flipping a coin. If you get 5 heads in a row, your gut feeling, your automatic system screams tails is due. It doesn't feel random anymore.
Even though each coin flip is independent,
Yeah.
50-50 every time. But 5 heads doesn't match our representation of randomness.
And the V-bomb example fits here too. The pattern didn't look random to people, so they assumed it wasn't random. It didn't represent their idea of randomness.
The cancer cluster idea also ties in. A cluster doesn't represent uniform distribution, so we assume it represents an underlying cause, even when it might just be statistical noise.
Okay, so understanding these biases that we're not purely rational econs, but fallible humans, using these automatic shortcuts, that's the foundation.
Right. And because we are like this, the way choices are presented to us is never neutral. It always influences us, whether intentionally or not.
And that's where the concept of choice architecture comes in.
Exactly. Choice architecture is simply the environment in which people make decisions. It's how the options are designed, displayed, ordered, described, everything about the context of the choice.
And a really key insight from the source, maybe even a bit surprising, is that you can't avoid being a choice architect.
Impossible. Even trying to be neutral involves making choices. Like, do you list options alphabetically? Randomly, by popularity. Each of those is a design choice that will subtly influence the outcome.
They use the brilliant example of Carolyn in the cafeteria.
Yeah, just by changing the order of the food, putting healthier stuff first, or making desserts slightly harder to reach, she could significantly change what people ate, sometimes by 25% or more.
She was architecting choices whether she fully realized it or not.
Absolutely. And within this idea of choice architecture, we get the definition of a nudge.
Okay, so what exactly is a nudge according to the source?
A nudge is basically any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives.
So no mandates, no big taxes or subsidies.
Right. It's not about forcing hands. It works by tweaking the choice environment, the architecture, often to make it easier for the human in us to make the choice that the more rational econ or our own reflective system would prefer.
And the goal of good choice architecture, as they see it?
It's not about manipulation for its own sake. It's about making life easier, maybe safer, and helping us game. Humans make better decisions for ourselves, the decisions we'd likely be happy with in hindsight, the ones our reflective system would endorse if it had the time and energy.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do you design good choice architecture? What are the principles they lay out?
They offer several really practical principles. The first one, and maybe the most powerful, is understanding and using defaults.
What happens if you do nothing? The path of least resistance.
Precisely. People have a strong tendency to just go with the default option. It leverages inertia, or what they call the, heuristic. It's just easier.
We see defaults everywhere, right? Software settings, magazine auto renewals.
Yeah, but the impact is most dramatic in really important areas, like retirement savings.
Ah, the auto enrollment example.
It's huge. The source highlights study after study showing that when companies automatically enroll employees in a savings plan, meaning they have to actively opt out if they don't want it, participation rates skyrocket.
Compared to opt-in systems where you have to actively sign up.
Massively different. You might go from, say, 40% participation with opt-in to over 80%, even 90% with opt-out auto-enrollment. Even in the UK example they mentioned, where companies offered free matching funds, uptake was low until they switched to auto-enrollment. People just didn't get around to signing up.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really is. Defaults also kind of feel like an implicit recommendation, don't they? Like, if this is the default, it's probably the standard or suggested way to go.
And you can't avoid having a default, can you? There always has to be a rule for what happens if someone does nothing.
Exactly. So the choice isn't whether to have a default, but which default to choose.
Okay, so defaults are number one. What else?
Second principle, expect error. Good design anticipates that humans will make mistakes. It tries to make those errors less likely or at least less costly when they do happen.
Like the Paris metro ticket system they mentioned. You can put the ticket in either way, it doesn't matter. Reduces the chance of error.
Or gas caps being attached to the car so you can't drive off without it. Or headlights that turn off automatically. Little things that prevent common slip-ups.
They also mentioned systems that make errors almost impossible, like maybe ignition interlocks for drunk driving.
Yes, that's a more forceful version. But even simple nudges, like medication reminders, alarms, or blinking lights on pill bottles, help prevent errors in taking medicine correctly. Timing, dosage, it helps manage human fallibility.
Makes sense. Principle 3.
Give feedback. People need clear, prompt information about their choices and the consequences. Good feedback helps us learn and adjust.
The digital camera example is perfect. You take a photo, you see it instantly. Great feedback.
Compare that to the old U.S. color-coded terror alert system they critique. It changed colors orange, red. But what were you supposed to do differently? The feedback wasn't actionable.
Right, it didn't help you make a better decision.
Whereas feedback on home energy use, showing you the cost in real time, maybe comparing your usage to your neighbors, that is actionable. It makes the abstract cost concrete, adds a social comparison element, and has been shown to actually reduce energy consumption.
Okay, number 4. Structure complex choices. Humans get easily overwhelmed when things get too complicated.
Totally. Especially when it's hard to understand how the different options actually translate into real-world experience. They call this mapping.
Mapping.
Yeah, connecting the choice to the eventual outcome or experience. Choosing ice cream has easy mapping. You get a sample, you know what you'll get.
But choosing between 20 different health insurance plans with deductibles, copays, networks.
That's hard mapping. It's incredibly difficult for most people to accurately predict how those features will affect their health outcomes or their wallet down the line. Same for complex mortgages.
So how can choice architecture help with hard mapping?
One key idea they propose is a recap requirement for complex products. Think clear, simple, standardized summaries of key costs, terms, and usage patterns.
Like the summaries you already get on credit card bills, showing fees paid, spending breakdown.
Exactly. They argue this kind of transparency should be mandatory for things like mortgages, student loans, maybe even cell phone plans. It makes comparison easier, boosts competition, and helps people understand what they're actually signing up for.
And this could potentially help level the playing field, too. They mentioned studies about car buying.
Right. Standardized, clear information available online or in summaries might reduce the disadvantages faced by some groups, like women or minorities, who studies suggest sometimes end up paying more in face-to-face negotiations for things like cars. Transparency helps everyone.
Structuring complex choices also involves just simplifying, right? Not overwhelming people.
Absolutely. Too many options can lead to decision paralysis. Think about choosing paint colors hundreds of shades of white, or scrolling endlessly through Netflix or Amazon. Sometimes less is more.
And things like collaborative filtering that people like you also liked, suggestions.
That's one way companies try to structure choice, to simplify the fire hose of options based on past behavior of similar users. It can be helpful.
But they add a little warning note there, too.
Yeah, a potential downside is that it might reduce serendipity, stumbling across something new and unexpected that you wouldn't have otherwise found. You could end up in a filter bubble.
Okay, and the last principle, something about incentives.
Right, incentives. Now, nudges aren't primarily about changing economic incentives in a big way, but they often work best when incentives are made clear and salient, visible.
So not changing the price much, but making sure people notice the cost.
Exactly. Like that cost-disclosing thermostat showing you the dollars ticking up as the heating runs.
Mhm.
Or hotels charging for lights left on makes the cost of energy used directly apparent to you. Making the existing incentive visible acts as a nudge.
Okay, so those are the core principles. Defaults, expect error, give feedback, structure complex choices through mapping, recaps, simplification, and making incentive salient.
And the source shows how these principles can be applied to tackle some really big, important, real-world problems, often with surprisingly significant results.
Let's go back to saving for retirement. You mentioned auto-enrollment already.
Yes, it's the star example. The sheer power of changing the default from opt-in to opt-out is undeniable, massively boosting participation.
And they also talk about the Save More Tomorrow program.
Right, another clever nudge designed by Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler. It asks people to commit now to increasing their savings rate later, whenever they get a pay raise.
So it bypasses our present bias, our tendency to prefer immediate gratification and also loss aversion, because the savings increase comes out of the raise, so your take-home pay doesn't actually go down.
Exactly. It leverages our biases to help us save more. And the source notes these ideas have gained traction, even bipartisan support, leading to things like the Pension Protection Act in the U.S., which encouraged auto-enrollment.
And they contrast this with the U.S. Social Security calculator, giving that single lump sum, calling that poor choice architecture, because it doesn't help people map the complex reality of retirement needs.
Right. Bad mapping, unhelpful anchor.
What about investing? Another area where emotions and biases run wild.
Oh, yes. They tell the story of Vince and Rip to illustrate how loss aversion interacts with how often you check your investments.
Vince checks his portfolio constantly, sees every little dip, feels the pain of loss aversion frequently. Rip checks maybe once a year, sees the smoother long-term trend.
Exactly. Frequent monitoring of volatile assets can be psychologically painful due to loss aversion, potentially leading to worse decisions like selling low in a panic. Less frequent monitoring can sometimes be better for your sanity and your returns.
They also discuss naive diversification strategies.
Yes, like the 1N rule. Give someone, say, 5 fund options, and a surprising number of people will just put 20% in each, regardless of whether those funds are all stocks, all bonds, or a mix.
So the number of stock funds offered could actually influence how much people invest in stocks overall.
Weirdly, yes. If you offer more stock funds relative to bond funds, people using the simple 1 rule might end up with a higher overall allocation to stocks just because of the choice architecture.
And the danger of putting too much in your own company's stock.
A huge risk. People do it out of loyalty or familiarity, maybe overestimate its prospects. But it's incredibly risky diversification-wise, as the Enron collapse tragically showed. Your job and your retirement savings can disappear at once.
So they suggest a nudge for that too.
Yeah, a Sell More Tomorrow program. Commit in advance to gradually selling off some company stock over time, maybe timed with bonuses or vesting schedules, to diversify more prudently without the immediate pain of selling.
Okay, let's talk borrowing and credit. Mortgages, credit cards, notoriously complex.
Definitely. Mortgages are hard to map. APR helps but doesn't capture everything, like points or the risks of variable rates, especially in the subprime market with things like prepayment penalties.
And this is where they really push for those recap requirements again.
Yes, mandating clear, simple, standardized summaries for mortgages and student loans. Just like the Schumer box for credit cards helps compare basic rates and fees, they argue this transparency would boost competition and empower borrowers.
And protect against exploitative practices.
Potentially, yes. Better information makes it harder to hide unfavorable terms in the fine print.
And credit cards themselves often use, let's say, less than ideal choice architecture.
Oh, absolutely. That minimum payment anchor we talked about. Fees buried deep in complex agreements. Marketing focused on rewards while downplaying interest costs. It's an area where choice architecture is often used against the consumer's long-term interest.
Okay, moving to a very different area. Organ donation. This seems to be one of the most dramatic examples of nudging.
It really is. The difference between opt-in and opt-out systems is just staggering.
Opt-in is where you have to actively sign up to be a donor, like ticking a box on your driver's license form in many U.S. states.
Right. And opt-out, or presumed consent, is where everyone is assumed to be a donor unless they actively register their objection.
And the difference in donation rates.
It's enormous. The source cites data showing countries with opt-in systems might have donation rates around, say, 15–40%,
Yeah.
while countries with opt-out systems often reach 80%, 90%, even higher.
Wow. Just changing the default has that much impact.
It appears so. They even mentioned a study condition with a sort of neutral choice where people explicitly had to click yes or no. Even that got much higher rates, around 79%, than pure opt-in, suggesting just making people choose helps. But the opt-out default is incredibly powerful.
Places like Spain have presumed consent, right?
Yeah.
Very high rates.
Yes. And they mentioned other approaches, like the Illinois registry making first-person consent legally binding, removing the potential family veto as another piece of choice architecture aimed at increasing supply.
Okay, what about environmental protection? Can nudges help there?
The source discusses both market-based approaches like emissions trading, cap and trade, citing the success of the U.S. acid rain program.
Which uses incentives, making pollution costly.
Right. But they also highlight information disclosure as a powerful nudge. The Toxic Release Inventory, TRI, in the U.S. is a key example.
This just required companies to report their toxic emissions publicly.
Exactly. Naming and shaming, essentially. And remarkably, many companies significantly reduce their pollution voluntarily just to avoid the bad publicity and public pressure. No new tax, no mandate, just information disclosure acting as a nudge.
And they propose something similar for greenhouse gases.
Yeah, a greenhouse gas inventory applying the same logic. Transparency can drive change.
They also touch on things like fuel economy labels again.
Right, saying MPG, miles per gallon, is actually quite hard for people to translate into real-world fuel costs. Showing estimated annual fuel cost, or cost per 100 miles, provides better mapping and makes the cost of fuel inefficiency more salient. Better choice architecture for car buyers.
Let's talk school choice. This often framed purely as increasing freedom.
And the source agrees it can increase freedom, but emphasizes that freedom isn't meaningful without good choice architecture to help people navigate the options effectively.
What kind of barriers do they mention?
Things like subtle, friendly discouragement from officials steering parents away from certain choices, or just information overload. They mentioned a Charlotte district sending out a 100-page booklet. Who can process that?
So people just stick with the default.
Often, yes. Status quo bias is strong. The neighborhood school is the easiest option.
But nudges can help here too.
Definitely. They show how providing parents with simple, clear fact sheets summarizing key school data test scores, class sizes, etc., significantly help them make more informed choices that align better with their priorities.
And they even mention economists redesigning the actual lottery system in Boston.
Yeah, because the old system inadvertently encouraged parents to make strategic mistakes, listing only highly popular schools and risking getting nothing. The new system was designed to make it safe for parents to list their true preferences. Better choice architecture for the allocation mechanism itself.
In the San Marcos, Texas example for college attendance?
A great case study. They used a bundle of nudges, offering free practice SAT tests at the high school, providing help with complex financial aid forms, holding parent information sessions, small things that reduced friction.
And it worked.
Significantly increased the rate of students enrolling in college, especially from lower income backgrounds. It shows how targeted nudges can overcome specific barriers.
Wow. The source seems to cover a huge range of potential nudges. Any others worth mentioning quickly?
Oh, loads. They touch on a Give More Tomorrow program for charity, similar to Save More Tomorrow. The idea of an automatic tax return, where the government sends you a pre-filled form you just approve or correct, simplifying taxes massively.
Things like stick.com, commitment contracts.
Yeah, using loss aversion and social pressure to help you achieve goals. Self-banning programs for gamblers. Health plans like Destiny Health that offered financial incentives for healthy behaviors like going to the gym. Even little things like delays on sending angry emails.
Giving your reflective system a chance to catch up.
Exactly. So many potential applications.
Okay, this all sounds potentially very powerful, maybe even beneficial, but it does raise some questions, some objections. People must push back on this idea of being nudged.
Absolutely. And the authors address these head on. It's crucial to consider the ethics and potential downsides.
The most obvious one seems to be the slippery slope argument. If we let the government or companies start nudging us, where does it start? Doesn't it lead towards more control, more manipulation?
It's a natural concern, But the key defense offered in the source is the libertarian part of libertarian paternalism. The emphasis is always on preserving freedom of choice. Nudges, by definition, are easy to opt out of.
So putting fruit at eye level is a nudge. Banning junk food is a mandate, a shove.
Exactly. That freedom to choose differently is the crucial safeguard against sliding into outright coercion. It distinguishes this approach from more heavy-handed forms of paternalism.
What about the invisible hand concern? The idea that, well, maybe private companies will just use choice architecture to exploit people, like those credit card fees hidden in the fine print.
That's a very real risk,
Mm-hmm.
and the source acknowledges it fully. They aren't naive about market failures or predatory practices.
So what's the answer then?
They argue that because choice architecture is unavoidable and influential, we need rules of the game. Both public and private choice architects should operate within guidelines that promote transparency, competition, and genuinely helpful design, while curbing manipulation and exploitation. Using policy to protect vulnerable consumers is seen as perfectly legitimate.
Okay, but then the really big question. Who decides what's best? Isn't any nudge just the choice architect imposing their values, saying, this is better for you?
This is maybe the most fundamental philosophical challenge, but the source's answer hinges on their definition of better, which helping people achieve their own goals. The goals they would likely pursue if they weren't hampered by biases, lack of information, or self-control problems. If they were acting like that rational econ, or using their reflective system effectively.
So it's not about imposing external values, but helping people overcome internal barriers to act in line with their own deeper preferences.
That's the argument. If a nudge works, it's often because it helps you do something you already, on some level, want to do. Save more, eat healthier, make a more informed choice, but find difficult due to predictable human tendencies.
So given all this, should we just be nudging all the time, everywhere? Is it always the right approach?
No, definitely not. The source is clear on this too. Sometimes striving for neutrality, maybe randomizing options is the best approach.
When might that be?
Perhaps when choices are very simple, or when people have very stable preferences, or maybe when fundamental constitutional rights are involved, like voting or free speech. You probably don't want defaults there.
Sometimes you might want people to make an active, conscious choice.
Exactly. Required active choosing can be appropriate too. Nudges are generally most helpful, they argue, when choices are complex, infrequent, give poor feedback, or where human psychology makes us prone to errors we ourselves would later regret.
And what about transparency? Should these nudges be hidden, working beneath our awareness?
No, the source argues strongly against that, especially for government nudges. They advocate for a publicity principle.
Meaning?
Choice architects, particularly public ones, should be willing and able to publicly explain and defend their chosen architecture. The nudge shouldn't be secret or manipulative. Its goal and mechanism should be transparent.
This seems linked to that idea of nudge versus shove again, keeping things open and respectful of autonomy.
Right. They favor what they call asymmetric paternalism interventions that ideally impose very low costs or even zero cost on people who don't need the nudge, the econs, but provide significant benefits to those who are prone to error, the humans.
It's a fine line, perhaps.
It is. And they acknowledge the ongoing debate about how far intervention should go. But their framework consistently emphasizes preserving that ultimate freedom of choice as the guiding principle.
So wrapping this all up, the core message from this deep dive into nudge seems to be, well, context is everything.
Or at least, context matters enormously. The environment in which we make choices, the choice architecture, isn't just a neutral stage. It actively shapes our decisions in profound ways.
And understanding this, understanding choice architecture, it's actually really empowering, isn't it?
Absolutely. It helps you become more aware of how you might be influenced by product placement, website layouts, government forms, everything. And hopefully it helps you think a bit more deliberately about your own decisions, maybe recognizing your own automatic tendencies.
It definitely gives you a new lens to look at the world.
So maybe a final thought for you, listening. Think about a significant decision you've made recently. Could be big, could be small.
How might the way the options were presented, the choice architecture, have influenced your final choice? Perhaps in ways you didn't even notice at the time.
Could a different setup, a different framing, maybe better feedback, or a different default have helped you make a choice that your future self might have preferred even more?
Or looking outwards now, is there some area in your own life, maybe at work, in your community group, even just managing household chores where a simple, low-cost, freedom-preserving nudge could actually make a real positive difference by making a better choice just that little bit easier for someone.